This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is sponsored by Sports Interaction. Want to bet? Then get in on the action at Sports Interaction. Whatever your sport, Sports Interaction has you covered. Bet pregame, in-game, or on one of our many unique prop bets. Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN, or in Ontario, download the app now using the QR code at the bottom of the screen. 19 and over, please play responsibly.
I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show. Powered by Sports Interaction. Wanna bet? What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
Big Money Siege coming at you on a Saturday. I have to admit, shit could go down at any moment, and we have to be ready for it. I know I said shit. I know I shouldn't be swearing on this podcast. It's just crazy, man. Like, I know you look down on your phone, just in case stuff happens. I will probably have my eyes darted towards Twitter just in case something happens. Legit, like seconds before we started, Boston, Colorado put together a trade, Shane Bowers for Keith Kincaid. Like, shit could happen at any moment.
Right. And the odds of any of this not being dated at some point when you're listening to it are pretty low. So that's a disclaimer right off the top. Because the bullets are flying now. There's lots cooking. I'm a scatterbrained mess in the best way possible because I'm having lots of fun, but my phone is yes, it's lighting up a fair bit. So let's start with the big news of the day, Julian. I think that Patrick Kane, we got to get right into it. The machinations now seem to be happening for him to be moved by the Chicago Blackhawks. We'll stick to what we know at this point in time. Patrick Kane has left the team. The team is in San Jose on Saturday where they play tonight. He's left the team to return home to Chicago. In the last 24 hours, I think there's been a lot of discussion behind the scenes about a potential move to the Rangers. We've started to see the Rangers make some cap type maneuvers, including keeping Jake Leschyshyn and Vitaly Kravtsov out of their lineup for a game Saturday afternoon. And it's believed both of those players would have to be removed from the roster at minimum to fit Kane's contract on, even at 25%, even with double retention. And at this hour, we don't know that Patrick Kane has formally waived his no movement clause or given Blackhawks management a reason to believe he would waive it. But I would say this, I don't think all of the previous things that I said that are now in place are happening unless there's some understanding that that's the case. And so, this is going to be a developing story. It seems like the only thing at this stage holding up a potential trade for Kane to the Rangers really is the Rangers cap situation. What complicates things further is they're playing a game actually as we're recording this in Washington on Saturday afternoon, and Ryan Lindgren, a defenseman, suffered what looked like a potentially serious shoulder injury in that game. And so, even as we're recording this, the Rangers don't have a full view on what Lindgren's status is, but needless to say, if he's done for the rest of the regular season, for example, that's going to have cap implications. Perhaps, because he's a defenseman, it might change what they have to do in terms of trying to get a D-man in addition to Patrick Kane. So, we're really in a moving parts kind of situation. So it's hard to pinpoint precisely when this trade will go down. But it's hard to imagine a scenario where Kane would have left the Blackhawks in the middle of a road trip. Keep in mind, he's got those 10 points in the last 4 games. They've won 4 straight heading into this one, if a trade wasn't going to materialize. And as we've long suspected, I mean, the Rangers have been the apple of his eye. I don't think there's any mystery about that. What's interesting is some of the Rangers cap complications, we'll call them, are because they had in fact moved on from Patrick Kane. When they traded for Vladimir Tarasenko, it was because they wanted to jump the market and not wait to see what Kane's status was, to learn about his health, to see if he wanted to come. And they felt they had to make that move. They made a subsequent trade and got Tyler Mott out of Ottawa last weekend. And because of those things, they don't have a lot of cap space. And so, I think it's Kane's willingness or desire that if he was going to be moved to go there, that's really pushed this ball forward. Because I really believe the Rangers were going to not make this kind of trade. And now it's hard to imagine a set of circumstances occurring where it doesn't happen. I just think it's a matter of everything that needs to fall into place on the Rangers end. And then ultimately, Chicago is going to have to make a trade. They're going to have a third-party broker that, there's no way this trade happens without the Blackhawks retaining 50% of Kane's salary and another team taking another 25%. And so, we'll keep digging through all the turning over every stone to figure out exactly what it's going to take. But I really do believe we're going to see Patrick Kane become a New York Ranger by the deadline next Friday.
So if we know that's what he wants, like, what is this holdup on his end with deciding whether or not to waive the NMC and this so-called period of reflection, as Pat Brisson, his agent, said earlier today? Just reading the tweet from Pierre LeBrun: Patrick Kane won't play tonight, from his agent Pat Brisson, or Pat Brisson, however you want to say it. Based on the current status of Patrick's situation, we collectively felt it was more appropriate to have him not play during this period of reflection.
I mean, I think that's semantics, right? Because there's no trade for him to approve at this time, right? Like the Rangers can't make this deal again as we're recording this right now and be cap compliant. They have Jake Leschyshyn on waivers on Saturday. That goes until the waiver period, 2 p.m. Eastern on Sunday, where he's either claimed or he clears and they can send him to the American Hockey League in Hartford. That's probably one roster move that has to happen. Vitaly Kravtsov, who I mentioned, he's requested a trade from the Rangers. It's my belief / understanding, I don't think he's going to Chicago in this trade. Now, that isn't 100% ironclad, but the best intel I have at this time is that he might be going somewhere else in a subsequent trade to clear cap space. So he's not necessarily directly part of a potential Kane move. And so, at this point, it probably doesn't. There's not a lot of upside for them to say he's waived for New York, because he hasn't really waived for New York because there's nothing to waive just yet. I mean, waiving your new no move clause, there's actually paperwork, right? Like there's actually in the CVA something he has to sign that goes along with a trade call, that goes along with the completion of a trade. And so that isn't before him yet. But as I say, I think that there's been a high degree of transparency and discussion between Pat Brisson and Patrick Kane's agent, obviously Kane himself, Kyle Davidson, and the Blackhawks front office. I think everybody is on the same page here. And so it's just about letting everything have to come together to make this deal work. And as I say, I don't want to put a day that it's going to go down now, because, this new injury situation could change the Rangers cap picture. I mean, it really is a fluid situation, but it would be a surprise at this stage if it wasn't Kane, ultimately going and being a Ranger at some point before this deadline period ends.
I have a stupid question. I forget who suggested this on Twitter, and I really apologize. I don't remember who suggested that, but I saw something and it made me think of something. You mentioned the no movement clause for Patrick Kane. Let's say this is a situation where Chicago and the Rangers are consummating some kind of trade, and maybe in order to make stuff work, they got to add like a third party in there, do some, as I like to call, money laundering. I mean, no, it's not money laundering, it's not salary retention, but I'm just making it funny. And they got to put some of Patrick Kane's salary there. Does that mean that he has to like waive his no movement clause like twice?
Yes, I think functionally he does. I think that's how it works, because obviously the first trade is a trade. It will be recorded as Chicago trades Patrick Kane to team Y for this, and retains 50%, and that team trades him to the Rangers and retains an additional 50%, which is 25% of the overall deal. And there's a few teams out there that are doing this. We mentioned Montreal on the last podcast. They actually have the space necessary to be the third party in the Kane deal. It's not to say they will be, but they do have the ability to do it. I think Vancouver's let teams be known that they'll be that money launderer, third party banker, broker, however you want to refer to it. We've seen Minnesota do it on 2 deals. I don't think they'll do it on a third. You're only allowed to retain 3 contracts, money on 3 contracts at any given time. I think that they'll save their final spot for other potential moves with their own players. And so, yeah, there's a few teams out there that are waiting in the weeds, looking to basically get an asset in order to pay. And, that's the other thing. They actually, in addition to Patrick Kane waiving his no move clause, they actually pay the portion of his salary. Like, I think it, like how you get paid from the Athletic and from the SDPN, I think like literally a portion of his salary will come from the Montreal Canadiens or whatever team, ultimately ends up being the third party. And it's kind of a strange thing, just as Shea Weber's contract got traded to Arizona this week. And now he's getting pay stubs with the Coyotes logo, and it's his second team since he's last played a game. It's kind of all this weird stuff comes out of a hard cap system, and this is the result of where we are.
Hey man, diversify your portfolio. I'm all about that. Anything else you want to add about Patrick Kane before we move on to Timo Meier?
Nothing else at this point. But look, this looks like it's happening. I'd be very, very, very surprised if it didn't happen at this point. But New York has to make some subsequent moves, and so, I'll just say this: we saw a deal we thought with Gavrikov potentially going to Boston fall apart this week, and that looked like it was going to be done. Pending Boston making other moves. So I guess you can't put the cart too far ahead of the horse. Because you can't just invent cap space. So the Rangers got to create some cap space, and then I think this will be a reality.
All right, time for Timo Meier. What do you know? Tell us.
The list of teams is getting shorter. St. Louis came in there after, acquiring 2 more first-round picks for Tarasenko and O'Reilly. It sounds like they're out of the mix now, though. They put both those first-rounders, I believe, on the table in their offer for Meier. The teams I think are still in it for sure are Carolina, New Jersey, and Vegas. I'm not aware of anyone still in the picture beyond that at this stage. And, I think, Timo Meier is being held out of the game for roster management reasons or trade related reasons, whatever the terminology being used by the Sharks PR staff for that one on Saturday. He did miss a couple games this week with a minor upper body injury. So, I think that we see this trade go down before the deadline, because it seems as though I know that at least a couple teams have been told by Mike Grier, the Sharks GM, that they're out of the mix. I'm really compelled, to be honest, by the fact that it's the Hurricanes and the Devils. I think the Hurricanes have upped their offer here in the last 24 hours or so. These teams are competing against the Rangers, so to speak, right? I mean, what we have in the Eastern Conference right now is an arms race. All the best players in the league that are being traded pretty much are coming into the Eastern Conference. And we have obviously the best teams in the league play out of the East. The West is far more wide open, and it's not to say that an Eastern team will win the cup, but based on the regular season, the strongest teams are based in the East. So you have the Rangers loading up in the Metropolitan Division. They're in 3rd place as we're recording this. You have Carolina and New Jersey, vying for the top of the Metro Division, and they're both in on Meier. And so I think that's kind of an interesting dynamic that exists in these trade talks. And so, the price has been 3, pretty high-end assets. I think these are going to be high-end assets. I mean, it's a first-round pick. It's going to be either the top prospects in these organizations or maybe even young players going back to the Sharks. And, the Sharks they're looking to put some fresh paint on it, as I've said. They're looking to really overhaul their roster. It's as the days go by, it's less and less likely they're going to be able to trade Erik Karlsson at this deadline. So Timo Meier is their big chip to play, and I think that Mike Grier is trying to play it here and then in the shorter term, not leave it right till Friday, when the deadline period hits. So, some teams are being told they're out. The last ones now standing at the table have to up their offers and see which one wins.
I don't know why I wanted to make like a Bachelor comparison, just the idea that you have these 3 viable suitors going for this one piece or
only one rose
and all that. One rose, man. Who gets the final rose?
I can't tell you. Honestly, it's impossible to handicap. There are some people out there, I'll say this, that think that Timo Meier wants to play in Vegas. But, the other part of this is, if you're the Sharks, do you want to trade him within the division? Because if he goes to Vegas, they're going to be trying to get him to sign an extension, kind of the way they did with Mark Stone when that deal went down with Ottawa. They immediately got his contract done, and within a couple hours anyway, they named him the captain. I think with Meier, a team like Vegas has cleared out some longer term cap space by moving the Weber deal, so they're probably going to be looking for an extension. But then so it's probably easier to trade him into the Eastern Conference in some ways. You don't have to play him 5 times a year, 4 times a year for the next 7 years. And then so it just comes down to what the best package is, right? I don't know that there's, that's really the job that Mike Grier has. And what's interesting here is it's such a different dynamic. Like, we didn't get into what the return is going to be on Patrick Kane. I'm still of the view it's not going to be that strong. Like, I think that the real issue that Chicago has is it's a 1-team race, and they just have to make whatever trade they can. I mean, this is the opposite of that. This is a player with term. He's 26. He's in the prime of his career, having a monster season, going to score 45 goals probably this year. And, so Mike Grier can really play these teams against each other and try to get the offers up to a more acceptable level. And so I think that's really where we're at now. It's down to a manageable number of teams. Again, it's 3, the only 3 I know of. If there's another team, it's kind of a mystery team that's lurking in the shadows. And then it's about getting the best package possible and ultimately pulling the trigger on the deal.
Okay, so we've mentioned Patrick Kane. We've mentioned Timo Meier. What about some of these other guys who are scratched for trade-related reasons? I see Sam Lafferty. We kind of sort of mentioned Vitaly Kravtsov. Vladislav Gavrikov's already kind of gotten a mention. Luke Schenn's also got to be discussed. Where should we start?
Well, we'll start with Sam Lafferty. The ask on him is a second-round pick. Not to say that that's what they'll get, but that's where the price has been set. He has a year beyond this one. I think a lot of these, we'll call them contending teams or teams looking to make long playoff runs like him because he good face-off guy, versatile bottom six player. And, he signed beyond this year at a manageable cap number. And so he's not just a pure rental if you're giving up assets. We'll see if Chicago can get a second for him. We'll go next to Gavrikov. I think what's interesting now is, so he's missed his sixth straight game. His trade related reasons scratch is, dragging on to now. It's like a 12th of his season, with a 10th of the season coming quickly here if he misses Sunday's game and then another one early next week. And, I believe we've talked all along that they wanted sort of a David Savard or Ben Sherratt like return for Gavrikov, first and third kind of thing. I'm not sure that first round pick's out there for them anymore. A big reason why the Capitals traded Orlov when they did as quickly as they did is because they felt that the first round pick on offer from Boston was the last one that we would see move for a rental player by any team, just when that was their read of the marketplace. And so, Columbus is now regrouping and likely getting what less of a return than they thought they were going to get in their potential deal with the Bruins. And so I think that that's kind of an interesting dynamic. Teams like LA, Edmonton, Toronto have looked at this player. I think a lot of them weren't interested at the price that it was set previously. So let's see just how low that price falls and how things shape up. I mean, you might end up getting, this player for, way less of the cost. I think it's shifting from what's been a little bit of a seller's market, if you had the top pieces, towards being a buyer's market. That's kind of what I see. Kravtsov, I mentioned, I'm not sure where he's headed. It's funny that they're announcing him. He's now got two of these, scratched for roster management reasons. He was scratched like half the season. They didn't announce anything, but because, they're signaling that he's available via trade. Young player, hasn't panned out, former top 10 pick with tons of skill. I think a good second chance candidate for someone. And I'm sure the Rangers will move him because they need to open up the cap space, it looks like. And then Luke Schenn is sort of hanging out on the vine back in Vancouver, skating on his own, as we've covered. We talked about the Leafs as a possibility for him. One thing that's happened here in the last 24 hours, Julian, is the Leafs got clarity on a pick condition from a trade they actually made with Arizona last year. And basically Arizona, as of Friday night, had a deadline that they could choose between taking the Leafs 2025 second rounder or the third rounder this year. And then they ended up taking the 2025 pick. Why that's significant is because the Leafs now have a third rounder this year. And that wasn't clear 100% that they were going to. And, it might take a third rounder to get Luke Schenn. And so, the Leafs are a little bit low on draft pick capital in general, as we've discussed. So, I'm not saying that he's their only target or anything like that. I really think the Leafs are looking to make the best move possible on their blue line. Another development that's happened actually on Saturday is they put Jordy Ben, a depth defenseman, on waivers, which I think does signal that they are intent and going to get another defenseman, for one, because they might lose Jordy Ben at his cost point for nothing. And even if they don't, then they can assign him to the American Hockey League. And they have roughly, if that happens, if he's off the roster, either by a waiver claim or if he gets sent to the HL, they have roughly $2 million in cap space heading into deadline day, give or take. And so that's the kind of player they can get. Of course, I would expect if it's a bigger salary player coming in, they're going to have, salary retained and all the like. But it does signal to me sort of formally that the Leafs are going to, feel they're going to get a defenseman. And I think it's a good market for them to explore, and we'll see where it comes. But if it ultimately ends up that Luke Schenn's the best option, they at least have the draft pick I think it's going to take to get him.
Jordy Ben on waivers. If he gets picked up, he becomes a former Leaf. Luke Schenn was a former Leaf. You know who else is a former Leaf? Kasperi Kapanen, who ended up getting picked up by St. Louis off waivers today.
He did, and this is big for the Penguins. I mean, they've been in salary cap jail all season. They actually had Jan Ruda, a defenseman, who they didn't have the ability to activate from injured reserve. In the short term, that's what the Kapanen move allows them to do. They were able to activate Jan Ruda on Saturday after Kapanen was claimed by St. Louis. I think it didn't work out obviously for the second go round for Kasperi Kapanen in Pittsburgh, but he was signed through next year with a $3.2 million cap hit. And so that does clear the books a little bit for Pittsburgh. I think it will allow them some room to maneuver at this deadline. I don't really know what they can get done. I mean, Ron Hextall is under all kinds of pressure. There was fire Hextall chance in Pittsburgh this week. They have the league's longest playoff streak in terms of making the playoffs. That's in jeopardy, at least. I mean, they're among, a handful of teams. All of a sudden, we got a great race for playoff spots in the Eastern Conference, by the way, between, Detroit and Buffalo coming on. Obviously, Washington has tailed off. Pittsburgh's in the mix there. The Islanders are still hanging around. I mean, it looks like it's probably going to go right down to the last weekend. And so Pittsburgh, would like to get a defenseman. I think they'd like to get a forward if they could, but they don't have much cap space. And at least if there's one positive, I think that they'd reached the end of the road with Kapanen. He was frequently a healthy scratch this year. His production has fallen off, and now they at least got a little bit of breathing room to try and make a move here in the next week.
Okay. My next item just says Edmonton. And I'm sure you're not referencing the fact that they're playing as we speak right now against Columbus. They were down 4-0. They came back to tie it, but I think the Blue Jackets are up 2 goals on them as we speak.
Yeah, crazy game Saturday afternoon that they're playing. A pretty crazy game happening behind the scenes too, right? I mean, we've talked so much about the Oilers because they've been attached to so many of the big names. I mean, even Patrick Kane, they've kept tabs on him, and there was some thought it might be possible. I mean, I'm not saying that was a main priority for them, but certainly they were aware that I think Kane would consider them at least. We talked a lot about Erik Karlsson, and I look at the board now and I'm like, where does Edmonton end up? I don't know that I think they really wanted to and still maybe want to. I shouldn't speak in the past tense because there's still 6 days to go and there could be a surprise out there for us. But, I think that they wanted to make a big splash and do what they could to help this roster. And, it just hasn't come together at this point in time. And so I kind of wonder if they end up just having to maybe settle for a smaller move or what happens. But, speaking about a GM under, considerable pressure, I think that Ken Holland is in that position, both with the fan base. We see what special players McDavid and Draisaitl are, but there's a lot of heat to try to give them the best chance at winning the Stanley Cup this year. And the reality is, this is the truth. Like, we don't even want to say this because this ruins our pod and everything, but the team that wins a trade deadline rarely wins in the playoffs, right? Like, Florida made the biggest moves at last year's trade deadline. It's actually impacted their ability to make any moves this season, and they got swept in the second round. And that's not just to pick on the Panthers. It's only to cite a recent example. I mean, quite often the 6 or 7 teams go something close to all in, and only one of them can win the Stanley Cup. And so it doesn't mean that Edmonton won't still be able to do something, but you just start to get the sense looking at the board and where they're at. They haven't been able to ship out any contracts to create the room needed to bring in players. I think most of the big names are kind of off the board or just not involved in talks with Edmonton. I mean, maybe they circle back on Jacob Chychrun. That's a huge maybe. I don't think the Oilers have necessarily loved that player. I know they've been attached to him. A lot of teams have been attached to him. I mean, we didn't even mention Chychrun. Keep an eye on the Washington Capitals there. I mean, with them trading away Orlov, getting another first-round pick in that trade from Boston, and having so few defensemen signed or locked up next year, I think that they're at least exploring, what it could take to get Chychrun and if they might have the fit. So that's a new team that's maybe resuscitated somewhat some of the Chychrun discussions. But I back to the Oilers, and I realize I'm all over the place. I don't know where the Oilers go is the easy answer. I mean, we know they've liked the Sam Lafferty, they've liked Nick Bjugstad. I think they have some interest in Shane Gostisbehere as a cheaper defensive ad, but if they make those types of moves, I'm not sure how that'll be met in the marketplace. It's a tough spot for them. And again, this all happens by Friday, March 3rd. By 2 weeks from then, it might almost be forgotten if the team goes on a hot run or has a great playoffs. I mean, you don't get a Stanley Cup for having the biggest trade at the deadline, but it just feels like the Oilers might have not be in the market now to make a huge swing and to make a big splashy ad.
Not sure if you noticed it while you were checking on your phone, but it looks as if Vitaly Kravtsov is going to the Canucks. That's what Elliot Friedman. Yeah, that's what Elliot Friedman is saying. That's the only person I've seen talk about it now, but I've seen Arthur Staple retweet that now. Like I said, this is a show that we know it's a pretty weird time with regards to the trades. And it looks as if Vitaly Kravtsov, who we just mentioned being scratched for trade-related reasons, is going to Vancouver. That's all we know right now. We don't know the full extent of that trade. We don't know what's going on. But that just goes. This is something we were trying to prepare for. Stuff happening literally on the fly. But that's all we know right now. I
can confirm that.
Okay, so we can get that down live, quote unquote, on the CJ show. Vitaly Kravtsov, the Rangers' former first-round pick, I forget from which year, going to Vancouver. I know a lot of Canadians fans were wondering if they would be in on Vitaly Kravtsov, considering the connection with Jeff Gorton. It looks as if he's going to Vancouver instead.
Yes, I don't have the full return yet, but I can confirm he's going there. And as I mentioned earlier in the episode, so that part wasn't dated. He was not part of the Patrick Kane trade. That was, what I was led to believe. And he's instead going to Vancouver. So are we almost wrapped up? I'm just worried if we talk more, it's going to be more dated.
No, it's cool. We pretty much ran through everything, and then this pops up at the end. But I guess the next question I'm thinking of now is, as we're talking about Patrick Kane and the Rangers trying to clear salary, with Leschyshyn on waivers, and then the Kravtsov deal happens. I guess we still have to kind of wait for tomorrow for the Rangers to be cap compliant, or does that accelerate things? How do you see it?
I wish we could have Hart Levine on from Puckpedia right now, because he's been all over this.
In fact, either he's working his Twitter or someone else's. This is from the Puckpedia Twitter. If the Rangers trade Kravtsov today and send Leschyshyn down tomorrow with no other roster moves, they would have room for Patrick Kane at 25% cap hit starting on March 1st. They could do it sooner by sending someone else down or including them in a trade.
So this is the beauty.
There we go.
Beautiful time of year, but feel the urgency in our voices. This episode, I don't even remember anything I've said. I need my lawyer here. I'm not responsible for anything I may have said on this podcast because I can't even remember what we said. But we already have this level of urgency, and we're still 6 days from the deadline.
Yeah,
this is crazy. This is nuts.
Okay, I think that's literally everything we can go through right now. This moment. It's entirely possible we might see more stuff by the time this podcast is released, but we're trying to be as up to the minute as we can here. We'll be back on Monday for sure with a brand new episode. Continue to get your questions in for Ask CJ. We'll get to them. And right up until the deadline, man, we're going to be coming at you with some content, man.
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready to fire this up and do a podcast whenever the mood strikes. So let's keep it going, bud.
Let's do it. For CJ, I'm Julian. So long. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and peace.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction. Want to bet?
Inside the Game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JKMcKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.